Hello, precious mamas and mamas-to-be. This is your host, Ilka B, with the Liberated Birth movement.
Another myth, C-sections are safe.
That is a very dangerous myth because every third baby in the US is actually born surgically. And they tell you it's totally safe for mama and baby. What they don't tell you is that we have more surgeries than anywhere else in the developed world. And we also have a way higher mortality factor in women that actually had a C-section. What does that mean? It means all these diseases and interventions like blood transfusions, uterine rupture, infections are way higher with women that have cesarean sections. And they also don't tell you about all these short-term and long-term effects that a C-section has on the baby and on the mother. And, not just physically, but also emotionally and psychologically. And often, and that is very sad, often these C-sections are at the end of a cascade of interventions and really not necessary. So what often happens is a woman has an induction. She gets Pitocin, and after that her contractions, her waves are really, really intense and she can't really handle it. So she opts in for an epidural. That will slow down everything and maybe stop sometimes labor. And then you end up with a failure of progress, and that means, or the baby's heart rate goes down, and that means you end up in the surgery room and you're being cut open. So I want to tell you a little bit about all these things that can go wrong and why C-sections actually aren't safe for mamas and babies and should literally only be considered in absolutely necessary cases, which is a few percent and not 35 as it is average in the US nowadays. So what happens to the mother? Not just that she physically will have a scar in her body, she also has to undergo a major abdominal surgery, and that, as we know, always has risks. One of the risks is the risk of infection, especially with multiple C-sections. There's a high risk of uterine rupture, means your uterus can actually burst and open up if you have multiple C-sections. What also happens if you have multiple C-sections is you have adhesions. Adhesions mean your inner organs actually kind of glue together, and that often comes with a lot of bowel issues for moms, and they will often not be resolved after a long, long time after surgery. Okay, so what happens else? Well, imagine you're having a major abdominal surgery. You're exhausted from that because you had a bunch of, drugs being pumped into your veins. You're kind of out of it, right? And so is your baby. You're not being fully alert when the baby is being born. And that means you can actually, miss out on this whole birthing experience. And often you don't get to bond with your baby right away. And that can mean for moms serious emotional drama for a long time. It also leads to you being really exhausted and having to heal after you come back home from the hospital. My mom actually just told me after her C-section with me, she had to be in the hospital for 6 weeks, and that was 1981. So imagine today, after 3 days, you're being sent home, and then you have to take care of maybe your other kids or your little baby and recovering yourself. That can be really, really hard to stay in bed and really make sure that you are healing from this major abdominal surgery. So that is just for the mother's side, okay? So there's a lot of things that happen for the baby that nobody talks about. And that is that, not just that the baby is obviously being as well taken away from its own birthing process. It means that it couldn't go through that birth canal, and that means its lungs weren't properly pressed, and that often leads to breathing issues for babies that had a cesarean section, and that can often lead them to end up in the NICU. What also happens is that immediate skin-to-skin contact that mamas should have when they have an undisturbed normal birth often doesn't happen if you had a C-section. You're being separated from your baby, and you will probably not see your baby for a long time, and that can lead to serious emotional issues for the baby as well. It can lead to babies that are crybabies, and it can lead to babies not having a full developed immune system, because they're missing out on that path through the birth canal and all the good germs that they get from that. And it also can happen that, babies have as well all these drugs that are being used to have a C-section, an epidural or anesthesia, that is as well in the baby's bloodstream. So that means that the baby's APGAR scores are usually not as good when they were first born. And they're also less alert, and that makes it really hard for them to breastfeed and latch on. Is it impossible to have a C-section and a baby latching on perfectly fine and breastfeeding amazing? Absolutely. But it's a rare case, and it more often than not happens that moms have a really hard time having their their milk come in and the baby latch on, because that normal sequence that's so perfectly designed by nature, and all these hormones that are coming in this cocktail for mama and baby are missed. And one thing that happens as well is with scheduled C-section, we don't really know when the baby's birthday actually was supposed to be, right? So if we decide to schedule a C-section, it might be that the baby actually wasn't quite ready yet. Its lungs weren't quite developed yet, and it's called a late preterm baby. And there's all kinds of little issues and long-term issues that come with late preterm babies, and the number of late preterm babies actually rises in the US because of all these C-sections and all these scheduled C-sections. So there's all kinds of problems that come with having a C-section for the mother and for the baby, long-term and short-term. Emotionally, physically, spiritually, psychologically, it is absolutely not just an easy thing. Cut open, get the baby out. There's so much more to it, and you better avoid a C-section to have a good outcome and a great bonding and a healthy baby and a healthy mama.
Please follow the Liberated Birth movement on Facebook or subscribe to our channel. If you have more questions how to apply these ideas to your pregnancy and birth, schedule a call and we'll get you clear on what you want and how to get it. Meetme.so/liberatedbirth. Meetme.so/liberatedbirth. Always remember, birth belongs to women.